I think now it has been become standard to say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining in webinars. But I think predominantly in this case, it's an Indian audience. So good afternoon, all of you. And it's a real privilege for me to welcome you to this hybrid seminar, a public presentation of Amit Kurien's work, followed by his PhD defense. Somebody said the other day that I was really beaming from year to year because we had Venkat's public defense just about 10 days ago. And now I have the special honor of introducing Amit and also the members of his DAC and the experts who have contributed to sort of bringing him to this stage. So welcome all of you, both in the room and online. A special welcome to Professor K.G. Saxena. If possible, Professor Saxena, if you can turn your video on, just so that the audience, Amit, can also see you. Professor K.G. Saxena, my voice is low, okay. Professor K.G. Saxena has been at the Jawaharlal Nehru University in the School of Environmental Sciences for several decades as a professor. And his work has spanned a very large part of India's geography, especially, however, in the Himalayas, including the northeastern part of the Himalayas. He's a plant ecologist, but has worked in a very broad set of topics, including natural resource management, environmental science, and sustainable development. And he has served as one of the reviewers for Amit's thesis and has been appointed as the external examiner for the defense. So it's my pleasure to invite Professor K.G. Saxena and welcome him to this public presentation. Thank you for taking the trouble and the time to be part of this. I would also like to invite Professor Suprabha Patnaik. I'm not sure she has made it to the participant list yet, but Professor Suprabha Patnaik was the second external referee for the PhD thesis. Professor Patnaik recently retired from the Indian Institute of Forest Management, Bhopal, where she was on the faculty for a couple of decades. And her work is particularly based in the Northeast. She's, like many of us, interdisciplinary in her approach, both doing plant ecology as well as looking at traditional ecological knowledge and community management of natural resources, where she's worked very extensively on questions of agroecology in the shifting cultivation systems in the Northeast over the last several decades. So thank you, Professor Patnaik, for having been part of the refereeing process, and welcome to this presentation. I'd like to also I'd also like to extend a special welcome to the DAC members of Amit's committee. I'd like to begin by welcoming Professor A.R. Vasavi. I think Professor Vasavi is known to many of us in this room, but I'd like to introduce her as India's probably one of the more eminent sociologists and somebody who works in the broad area of agrarian studies, rural development, as well as sociology of education. And Professor Vasavi was at the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad, followed by a long stint at the National Institute of Advanced Studies here in Bangalore. She retired from NIAS and started her own organization called Punarchit, which is dedicated to rural development in some of the backward parts of Karnataka. It's based in Chamarajnagar, and she works with the Soligas in BRLs as well as in that whole region, which I think many of us are familiar with, and also a site where ATRI has done a lot of work. Amit has benefited enormously by Professor Vasavi's guidance as part of the doctoral advisory committee. So I'd like to extend my personal thanks also to Vasavi, and welcome to this seminar. I don't know if the videos are on. I suspect many of people who are joining in externally are struggling with bandwidth issues. So, but if you can, Vasavi, turn on your video, it'll be nice. Also, Professor Saxena. I'd also like to welcome Professor Harini Nagendra, who is also a member of the DAC. Harini is really well known to many of us at ATRI because she was at ATRI for quite some time before she moved to the Azim Premji University, where now she is the director of the Center for Climate Change and Sustainability Studies, and her work both in the context of forestry as well as in the context of urban ecology is well known to all of us. Her special interest in Bangalore has made her work of particular sort of interest and excitement to many of us, but also her broad work in the field of sustainable development, urban commons, has been widely appreciated and well recognized. I don't think she needs any more introduction to this audience. Thank you, Harini, for your contribution to Amit's development as a PhD student, and welcome to this seminar. And finally, of course, Nitin Rai. Nitin, I hope your video can come on. Nitin Rai is from ATRI and works in the field of political ecology and has also contributed very significantly to Amit's growth as a scholar. So thanks, Nitin, and welcome to this public presentation. Welcome to everybody else in the room as well as in the online audience. A special mention I would like to make of Professor John Kurien, who has joined us today in person at ATRI. I'm really delighted that he could be here, and I'm sure he's eagerly waiting, like all of us, to hear what Amit has to say after his long journey as a PhD scholar. So without further ado, I will hand over the proceedings to Amit. Professor KG Saxena is officially now the chair and moderator of this part of the public presentation, and I'm only facilitating that given my slightly greater familiarity with the audience and the procedures. So, Professor Saxena, with your permission, I'll request Amit to start his presentation. Is he muted? I think Professor Saxena was not able to hear me. He messaged something. There was a chat message about. Yeah, so I think can you message him to log out and log in again? And we'll just wait for him to connect before we. He said something about not can't hear or some can't no audio. Huh. But no voice. I don't know which way it works. Yeah. Let's see. Professor Saxena, if you can hear me, it would be perhaps useful to log out and log in again. I think your microphone itself has not been connected to the Zoom call. Yeah. will log out of the call and log in. Still there.
Still, it's not leaving. Ask him if he can hear it. He's not replying to the message. No, it's not.
Were you able to hear me when I was speaking? You were the call by on Zoom. On Zoom, were you able to hear me? Yeah. So what it is showing is that your audio is not connected. So we need to just log out, disconnect from Zoom. Click the link again. Disconnect the link. Yeah. Because 1 second के बाद generally.
Hello. I'm just requesting everybody in the online audience to please wait for a couple of minutes. We are trying to connect Professor Saxena once again. Thank you. So, sorry for the hiccups. Professor Saxena will join via YouTube. So he has requested me to start the proceedings. So on his behalf, I am starting the proceedings, requesting Amit to start his presentations. Over to you, Amit.
Thank you, Sharad. So I'd like to, I think on my behalf too, I'd like to, welcome my examiners, Professor Saxena in particular, and Professor Patnaik, and to my doctoral advisory committee members, as well as the, the audience who have joined, both, physically here, as well as, the many people who've joined online. So, so let me start right away. The work is about shifting cultivation. It's about land use change and about livelihood sustainability. The interest of the PhD here has been to look at the causes and the consequences of these transformations in Garo Hills in the Northeast. Shifting cultivation was primarily, basically it was first viewed through the gaze of the colonizers in most parts of the world, and it was seen as a destructive, unproductive, and a highly, primitive form of cultivation that led to soil erosion. Consequently, shifting cultivators were also seen as primitive. They were seen as backward tribes in depending on which part of the world that you went to. They were also seen as pyromaniacs, and they had all sorts of names that were associated with them. In the last about 70, 80 years or so, there have been there have been three prominent discourses that have emerged. The first one is, we can call that the conservationist discourse, which is largely focusing on issues of deforestation and biodiversity loss. That's been their main concern. They've stated that shifting cultivation was the prime cause of deforestation. The second one is the agronomists and sometimes even the economists concern. Their statement was that shifting cultivation was an unproductive form of agricultural practice, that it caused soil erosion as well. More recently, there was agroecologists and anthropologists who studied shifting cultivation and shifting cultivation societies in detail and went on to say that no, that's not quite the case. You had shifting cultivation was actually a well-suited form of livelihood for hill environments, and the kind of socio-cultural context that societies there were embedded in it. And as a consequence of all of these discourses, very often in the last the same period, we've seen that in many countries, including India, we've had policy positions that were taken. In India, for example, June control schemes were started right from the first 5-year plan. And this was a consequence of these, these positions. In this case, it was, it was a carryover of the colonial discourse. But in reality, the large slew of work, that have taken place in the last, last couple of decades, has shown that shifting cultivation has actually gone through, a very wide variety of changes. It has extensified in many areas where it has moved into forested areas. It has intensified. In many other places, there have been sustainable practices that have emerged, and in many other places, you see that it has become highly marketized as well. But you also notice that very often the state plays a strong role in such in these with these communities, and you see that shifting cultivators often get relocated. There have been forced conversions of shifting cultivators to settled cultivation practices and so on. And therefore, such their landscapes as well as the societies have seen to be highly dynamic now. But in South Asia, there was some initial work that took place. People like Professor P.S. Ramakrishnan had done a very interesting set of work early on. But after that, there's been a lag in terms of the kind of work that has taken place. Most interestingly, I think in 2018 there was Niti Aayog that came out with a publication that stated that actually went on to question some of the current work that have taken place. They actually doubted that despite all the work that have gone on, we don't quite know how much shifting cultivation there is. We also don't, they in fact even went on to question, that whether this may in fact be the main role of deforestation in these parts, such as in So I move on to with that background, let me introduce my main research questions. The first one is, what is the current nature, extent, and pattern of shifting cultivation and other land use? The second concern is that of the causal history. What has been of these trajectories? What are the factors that are responsible for the kind of land use change that we see in these places? And as a result of these changes, what are the implications that they have on overall well-being? What are the implications that they have for socioeconomic differentiation as well as livelihood sustainability? In terms of theory and method, I have two main approaches. The first one okay. Let me introduce this by saying that let me preface this by saying that I've had three main chapters, of which I've had to take very different approaches for some of them. So I'm condensing them into two kinds of approaches. The first one is abductive causal eventism. And sorry for that, there's some. Yeah, that's okay. Thanks. And the second is sustainable rural livelihoods framework. I use a mixed set of methods for this, for this work. It includes remote sensing analysis, participant observation, land use mapping, household surveys, and a total of 17 months of field work was involved in doing this. I conduct this work in West Garo Hills district, Meghalaya. West Garo Hills is a place with semi-evergreen to moist tropical vegetation. The land uses are primarily shifting cultivation. There is horticultural plantations such as areca, there's cashew, rubber, and so on. There is old growth forests. There's wet rice cultivation and so on. Most of the people there are primarily they're Garos. So that's, I come to the end of the introduction there, and let me introduce my main chapters here. My second chapter looks at mapping of shifting cultivation and its patterns. The third looks at causal dynamics of land use change. The fourth looks at the consequences of these changes for well-being, socioeconomic differentiation, and livelihood sustainability. And then I conclude finally. In the mapping chapter, my main concerns are these. What are the main land uses that we see there? Because this is something that we don't quite understand even today. And what are their aerial extents in this particular region? What are the current fallow periods? And how are shifting cultivation intensities related to plantation extents as well as demography? And what are the methods that can be used to understand land covers as well as land uses that we see there? So that's how a canonical shifting cultivation landscape would look. You will have this is how the main thing to focus on is the successional continuum of vegetation within which you have several land uses. And so the challenge therefore is to sort of be able to distinguish these things. But the important thing then is also to be able to distinguish within shifting cultivation what are the places where you have cultivation that is going on and where you don't have cultivation that is going on. Very often in mapping work that we have seen in many parts of the country, as well as other parts of the world, such as in Laos and Vietnam and so on, we see that the general practice has been to focus on these burned areas, but that's not the entirety of the shifting cultivation. There are other land covers that are there which also need to be included. And therefore, it's important to be able to distinguish between land covers that land cover classes that are found within active cultivation, active shifting cultivation areas, to be able to distinguish between active shifting cultivation and fallows, between fallows and forests, and between forests and non-forests. So you have there are several tiers of confusion that exists. More importantly, I think it's important to be able to be clear about one's normative position when we are doing these forms of mapping. That it's important to note that mapping to be able to identify those classes that are of concern to members of society, to different stakeholders. And the land use categories that are used for our mapping are as follows. You have active shifting cultivation that I define, that include both the first and the second year of cultivation. The young fallow areas, which I define as 1 to 10 years of fallow period. Old fallows, which is 11 to 20, and old growth forests, which I define as greater than 20 years, because those are multi-storied forest areas. Then you have horticultural plantations, wet rice, other cultivation, and water bodies. So the data and methods that I use for these I use a 2-season site image analysis for this. And I use data from the post-harvest period, which would be in November, December, and the post-burn phase, which is in the summer season. And an extensive amount of ground truth was also covered. So a 2-season image was required for undertaking mapping of the shifting cultivation landscape. But then it was important when we are doing a 2-season mapping that it's important to be able to distinguish those areas where we have shifting cultivation, because if you look at this schematic here, you notice that in the post-harvest phase you have 5 and 8 that I have marked there. Those are the cultivation areas in that particular image. In the post-clearance and post-burn phase, you see 2, 3, and 6, which is the cultivation area in that image. But then it's important when you stack them up, it's important to not add all of them up, because that would then amount to double counting. So it's important to pick the right ones when you do this work. So in my case, I had chosen 2, 3, and 6. That's the set that I had chosen. But the land use map of the region looks like this then. Primarily, it's a standard. What shall we call it? It's a classic smallholder landscape. Basically, that's what we see here, and that's why it looks the way it looks. All of them are small parcels of cultivation areas, and that's why everything is so diverse in the way it looks. Land use statistics are as follows. The 3 things to focus here are this, and this. You have roughly 40% of the landscape, which is now shifting cultivation. There's 30%, which is plantations, and another 10, which is old growth. So the key point here is that 70% is primarily agriculture, and the statements, the fairly tall statements that were made that West Garo Hills had 80% of its district, which is forest cover, is not. I mean, you may have tree cover that is there, but it's not really forests. Fallow periods were estimated using the fallow to active shifting cultivation ratios. That was then multiplied. This was found. This was calculated for each community rural development block, which is the taluka equivalent, and that ratio was multiplied by 2, which is the number of years of cultivation, to give you the fallow period, which shows that the overall it's actually it's a highly intensively cultivated landscape. What we see here is one of the reasons that could be one of the hypotheses that could emerge as the reason for why this place is so highly intensively cultivated, where you have show that plantation areas are negatively correlated with shifting cultivation intensity. I had also looked at demography, the pattern of demography with shifting cultivation intensity, but that was not very strongly correlated. But we'll see what role demography plays into the next as we go on into the case studies. In my next chapter, I focus on the next 2 questions, which is what has been the land use trajectory that we see on time. What are the main reasons for this? What are the large set of factors and causes that explain it? And I use a village level case study to explore these questions. But in order to do so, I first surveyed a set of 17 villages. All of them had a very interesting pattern. All of them had horticulture tree crops. All of them had short fallow periods, and in all of these places, they all stated that it had actually shortened in time. And all these villages had a sharp increase in population as well. I finally chose, a village that I call Asumpara. Asumpara is a matrilineal village society, Garo village society. There are 3 clans, but they're mostly Christians and a few of Songsarak faith, who are primarily, the older Garo religion. 112 households and 682 people. I introduce the Sustainable Rural Livelihoods framework here. What the framework, basically says is that under any given, socio-environmental conditions, the set of livelihood strategies that are adopted by households happen where, depending on their access to capitals, certain kinds of capitals and livelihood assets that you see there. And that is then the access to that is influenced by the context within which they are found. So that would mean economic, cultural, social, political, legal, all of it. But then the Sustainable Rural Livelihood Framework is, in the words of Jan Skoons, who proposed it, is basically a guide to thinking. It's a guide to think about how communities may adapt to the conditions that is given to them. It's not a theory. It's not a research approach. It's not a very a strong research approach in terms of understanding certain things, particularly land use change and so on. So it's so in this case, what I'm doing is that I take this part of the work which is focusing on land use change, and I use the abductive causal eventism approach to address that. Abductive causal eventism is a method that primarily relies on abductive reasoning. Abductive reasoning begins by focusing on an event. It focuses first on an event. It operates in the reverse manner, in the sense that it focuses on the effect and then it works backwards to approach what could be the different causes that caused it. And here the event that I'm focusing on is land use change, and consequently there is this is therefore it's multi-causal in its approach. It's not and also multi-theoretic. So the final point that I want to make here is that it's something that is not mentioned by the proponents of ACE. I'm calling abductive causal eventism as ACE from now on. It's quite a mouthful. So so is that event and event related categories. So the fact that we choose something like land use change, or the fact that we choose something like deforestation or wildfire or any of these things, and the categories that we choose within that, which are of concern to us, is something that we see through a field of values. And I think we have to be explicit in terms of why we choose them, in terms of why they matter, and so on. We have to be very explicit about it. The methods for this is as follows. I had there was a 6-month intensive field work that I conducted in this particular village. It was the central pillar of the work here was it was participant observation, but it was also followed with PRAs. There was participatory rural appraisal, land use mapping. There was semi-structured and key informant interviews, as well as archival sources I had used archival sources as well. So and text the notes that I had gathered, that was analyzed as well, and there was also a household survey that I conducted in this area. So the land use map of the village actually looks like this. Primarily, it's 2 points. Half the the village is is basically shifting cultivation. The other half is plantation. There you are, 49 and 46. And I think this more or less sort of reflects the district level picture that we see. The quantitative changes that we see in the landscape are as follows. We have the extent of shifting cultivation. It had actually, when I looked at the historical picture here, that it was stable till about 1980s. But then with introduction of horticultural plantations, it fell to by about 50%, and this was by 2002 to 2018, and that was a sort of a linear decline that it faced. Active shifting cultivation, on the other hand, went through a sort of a non-linear decline. It increased to 1980s as populations grew, and declined to a total of 43 hectares. I'm sorry, I'm not able to sort of show all of this because of time constraints. Average family sizes, family field sizes are, earlier they were up to, say 3 to 5 hectares, and now it's come down really, they're really small, 0.5 hectares. These are, shifting cultivation areas that I'm talking about. So, and the fallow periods have come down from 20 to 5. Qualitative changes on the landscape are as follows. You have, what we see now is there is a fragmentation of this landscape, of the number of fields that we see there and the way it is spread out. I'll show you a picture very soon of that. We have isolated and private fields that now are increasingly succumbing to crop depredation. Cotton, which was an early commodity crop, is no more produced. Rice and millet, which used to be staple, has also declined. But increasingly, there is an emphasis on ginger, turmeric, vegetables, and tubers. And so it's a combination of fields that look like this, which are what we may call communal fields, where several households work together, and individual fields such as this, where a single field belongs to a family. Now I move on to looking at the causes of these changes, and there I focus on using ACE as the primary approach. One of the things that ACE, which was earlier called event ecology. There are people who have said, academicians who said that this is crude empiricism, and that theories are not sort of coming into the picture when we sort of try to address this question. What I want to focus on here is that that's really not the case. I'm going to focus on a few set of theories here, but I'm also primarily focusing on my on my work that I've done there. To show how these where these things play a role in becoming a cause or not. So population resource relationships is a very important say a broad set of theories, and there are several strands within them. The first one, of course, is popular to all of us, is the Neo-Malthusian prediction. The second is may also be familiar to many of us, which is the Boserupian prediction. The Boserupian prediction primarily states that with increasing population, the people who are there, they may take to intensifying agriculture, where population actually becomes a resource. You don't actually have a resource crunch, but actually you may have population itself is a resource in the form of labor, and then there can be intensification practices that goes on. But you have a third strand that also has gone well past the Boserupian prediction, that goes on to say that, well, population growth may or may not cause intensification. You may also have social, economic, and other factors that they either disallow either or allow intensification. One of the people who sort of made a sort of a leap in that direction is Harold Brookfield, who said that certain conditions actually create not intensification, but you may have tweaking of certain aspects, either social or cultural, in the society, that allows in the face of population increase, that allows for innovative practices that go on. The fourth, of course, within that broad rubric is you have when you have outmigration or remittances and so on, that ends up ameliorating the population pressure that you see there. Second is the second main strand is that market-driven land use changes that occur in a lot of places. The third is political economy of state development policies that you see, particularly in Southeast Asia and so on, where we've noticed that oil palm plantations that have extensive, that are now seen at a vast stretch of land. So when we look at population growth in this village, we see this pattern. On the left hand side you have that for the village, and here you have the population growth pattern for trends for West Garo Hills and Meghalaya. So they're very similar. It's been very steep. This is basically the initial stage of that sigmoidal curve. So part of the reason that this happened is because there were no frontier lands, for these cultivators to extensify. That is one. The second is that there was an improvement of health services in this area. There was pre-70s there were church missions that were very active, and then after that the state that was formed, and then that played a role in putting together primary health centers and so on. Also, because of militancy and reasons like that, there was no outmigration. Illiteracy and overall poor the economy did not sort of kickstart because of all these reasons, and there was no outmigration as a result. But we move on to look at another facet, which is to look at the aspect of the adoption of we see another cause of land use change is that another cause of land use change is horticultural, the adoption of horticultural crops that we have seen from among these people. But here it's important to note, to see the economic logic that sort of operates, which is this: that although I did the calculations for this to find out that shifting cultivation actually had a higher income returns per hectare, but what we see really is that you have a much larger landscape which is under fallows. So it makes under conditions that they are currently living in, it actually makes more sense to convert the fallows to plantations, in which case it suddenly becomes productive. So that is, in many ways, the sort of economic logic that is um, driving these peasants. And the land use change that we see there, but it doesn't stop with that. There are, those are just the two. Population and plantations are just the two, shall we say, the proximate factors that seem to be playing a role there. There are deeper explanations for why these things took place the way it took place. One of that is in 1960s to 80s there was there was a deep food crisis and a general scarcity that the place and actually the region around there faced because of lack of rainfall and so on. And so, as someone once told me there, my husband told me that soon we won't have anything left to eat if we don't have a few, areca fields. And those years were quite tough for us. So this is something that it was reflected, across many households that I, spoken with. And there was a pinch for rice. There was a real pinch for rice that these people felt. Many of them actually went to the markets. They stayed in the markets for a week and so on to get rice, to bring it, to sort of put it on their backs and, bring it back. So this was actually, there has been, a serious, a contingent event like this that led them to, take a decision towards adopting, a commodity that would give them cash. But cash income needs had also risen. One of the reasons for that is what I call what is cultural reproduction. I'll explain that a little bit more in detail. The second one is, you had, rising aspirations that we were now seeing among this community. With education, there is, increasing needs for housing, for more commodities from the markets, and so on. But their worldviews are also shaped by religion and religious change. Most of them are now Christians. With education and their exposure to markets and so on, and the overall development discourse that they are faced with, many of these households, they actually look to having cash. And one of the key means to do so is to have plantations. That is their main sort of resource. And therefore, plantations therefore become a symbol of wealth. Today it has pretty much replaced cattle, which used to be their main sort of symbol. And as someone sort of told me in a very pithy statement that Jesus saves the soul, and areca saves the household. And this is the aspect about the cultural reproduction that I was talking about. You need livestock. These families need livestock in order to for their the large set of cultural practices that they have in the Garo society. This picture was taken at a death ceremony. So you have families that bring animals for slaughter, but it's not just that. When you bring them for slaughter, the family that gets this resource then gives in return as a gift the best part of that animal. So, and there's a nice tally of that is kept by that house. And this form of reciprocity operates in Garo society across. I mean, it's not just in this village; it is found in other places as well. And these sort of dyadic acts are actually very, very integral to their society. And having livestock means you need to have, you need plantations, which can then become, money, and you can keep livestock. And that's the aspect about housing that I was talking about. Increasingly, that was, the one you see over to the left-hand corner is those were the early forms of Garo huts that you saw. But increasingly, you see the more cemented versions. that you see in the region. But it doesn't stop even with that. There were enabling factors that that explained what took place in this region. One of them was this: that it didn't happen overnight. That they suddenly just took to plantations, because the trade in plantations was actually largely dealt with. The markets were largely organized and put together by non-Garos. It's not Garos who are operating this. Are found there. You have Assamese, there are Bengalis, you have Koch, and so on. It wasn't Garos who are primarily operating. So what you notice is that good number of us don't know this, but it's if you talk to historians, they tell you this, that it's Garos have had a historical engagement with the Mughals in cotton trade, and this is something that played a role over a period of time. And them taking to the markets was only a natural next step. It was every time they needed a new product, or if they needed money, or they needed they always looked to the market, and this was something that was it's a natural inclination for them. But we also see that this region became the way it became also because of the constitutional autonomy that this region has. Garo Hills Falls, has a district councils. The region, is part of the 6th schedule of the Constitution of India, and because of the sort of federalist structure that we have, the region has tremendous amount of autonomy in terms of land management, and it is because of this that what we see there today, which is the flexibility of land tenure, the capability of them to convert what was otherwise, communal lands to more privately owned plantations, and the innovations that we see there is a result of this. That's a picture from 1919. So, Garos taking their cotton to the markets. So now I move on to my 4th chapter, which is looking at the question of consequences for well-being, socioeconomic differentiation, and livelihoods. Here, the main question is this: what are the current, livelihood strategies that we see in total, not just farm, but if there are others, that, and what are the implications of this for well-being, for socioeconomic differentiation, and if there are consequences for vulnerability to ecological changes, and so on. Here, there are 4 strands of work that that has influenced, I think, my work, that also speak to my work. I think the first is the aspect of what they call autonomous adaptation. This is something that you see in the literature, not only among shifting cultivation societies, but you see this among pastoralist communities. You see this among herders. You see this among smallholders in general. The idea here is that given conditions of change and so on, they adapt to there are new methods in terms of cultivation, or in terms of tenural change, in terms of several practices that farmers are adept at changing, which then go on to give them the capability to survive under different conditions. And the second theme there, it sort of also talks to that in some sense, which is that you have diversification in some situations, but there are other situations where if there is intense say market engagement or something like that, you could have livelihood specialization in terms of focusing on certain commodities only. But when I the third theme that I want to focus on is the aspect of equity, and that's an outcome in and of itself. There, I think the main body of work that speaks to the aspect of shifting cultivation focuses on the point that market engagement creates vulnerabilities. This is something that emerges out of the large body of work that has come from Southeast Asia, and work that also points to and in particular is a concept that emerged from some of this work known as intimate exclusion, where you have the markets that market engagement that allows households to exclude kin among even between kin. You have kin group kin group one that sort of excludes other kin groups in seeking new forms of livelihood. And the last outcome is the aspect of well-being, and there I primarily focus on Max Neef's work, which looks at two aspects. One is the concept of needs, which, according to him, remains the same across human societies, such as shelter, for example. Every family, every person needs shelter. So these are things that remain the same across societies. They don't change. Satisfiers change depending on the context, depending on the social context that you find them in, the cultural context that you find them in, the way you attain that that kind of shelter, the form of shelter you want, will change. And so, therefore, it's important to not only look at an objective understanding of well-being, but also focus on in this case, what is the Garo understanding of well-being? Do they have a sense of something that they feel that so that's something that is important to look at. I come back to this to this schematic of the sustainable rural livelihoods framework, but only to point out that here I'm focusing on this aspect. And here, the main point I want to focus here is this: that it is currently, livelihoods currently strategies have diversified. Mainly, they have the thing to focus on is that you have a large set of non-farm livelihoods that they're now involved in. Earlier, what you had was just this. These were the main activities that they were operating in with, and now you have much more. And of course, they had cotton too. So when we look at income contributions towards livelihoods, this is what we see. Areca nut sales and small businesses play a very key role. But I'd also like to point out the role that shifting cultivation seems to be playing. We notice that it's not very much in terms of income contribution. It's not all that much. And outcomes, when we look at, there is certain objective understanding that we can look at in terms of income. So when we examine that, one thing that we understand is that across the households in my household survey, what I found was that all the households that I sampled sit well above the rural Meghalaya rural poverty line. And food security, they have a significant amount of animal protein that they consume. Rice, in terms of it's not only their local rice that they consume, although consumption of that is less, but they have now diversified that too. You have the PDS that plays a role. They also buy rice from the market. But importantly, 50% of the rice 50% of the households actually get the wet rice grain, which is the culturally preferred source of rice. They don't prefer the PDS. They don't prefer the market rice. They prefer the ones from the wet rice, wet paddy areas. And all the households have their standard 2 meals apart from other things in between. So, and importantly, the thing to notice is also this, that is the cultural aspect, which is also this, that food is not only a private resource, it's also it is also a shared resource. So that plays a role too. And here, I move on to sort of look at the aspect of subjective well-being. So here we see that with the changes in livelihood strategies and the way that these households now are, they now have more time for leisure. They participate a lot in kin-based, leisure activities. And for this it's actually quite interesting that many of them actually partake in, shifting cultivation also plays a role there. The food that comes out of the shifting cultivation field, emerges, into their households, and people from, urban towns, urban areas actually visit these villages, and the partaking of food there is also seen as, a form of leisure activity. And they feel that a lot of these practices, would not have happened if it was not for the income that they have today, the time that they have today. Connected to this is the aspect of, retaining or enhancing, Garo identity. These in the work that I did, one of the things that I noticed is that, these are people who are primarily Garos first. They see themselves as Garos first. Everything else comes later, and the identification of the Garo as them as Garos work through their matrilineal, ties. That's how that's how they see it. And this identity is then is created and recreated through the leisure activities themselves. It's not only, the forms that I mentioned earlier, but also, they have, their identities are now, changed. The current identity has also changed. It's not because it's you have, their involvement with church, for example. So they spend a lot more time in with, church related activities. What this results in is that they really enhance their social capital, which they then use for, other purposes, sometimes in the form of attaining, a field for undertaking shifting cultivation in a later year. So that's how it works. So this is a common sight that you see there. Every morning you see this in the village. And it's not, this is an all-male group, almost an all-male group, but you also, it's a mix. You would see mixed groups. You see, sometimes all-female groups. So, yeah. But then, does this mean that, there is no, there are no changes? There are no, meaning in terms of, are there? Does this mean that there is no socioeconomic differentiation? If everyone is, if well-being is, if everyone feels that they are, doing well, does this mean that there is no socioeconomic differentiation? When I look at that question, I find that that's not actually true. So there are, axes along which we see that there are changes. We see that there is a culturally relevant fact, axis there, which is the heiress households. They seem to have more capital. They seem to have a lot more income in terms of a lot of, in many aspects, as compared to the non-heiress households. Heiress households are those households where, so the heiress is the youngest daughter of, obviously, the youngest daughter of a Garo family. If they don't have a daughter, they adopt a daughter, and she gets to keep, the house and much of the capital that is associated with, that household. But she has to take care of the parents. The heiress household is also the node around in a matri locality of the Garo community. This is something that's very important to note. But the three, okay, so I've just, I don't know why it's not coming up, but it's the main things that I wanted you to sort of take a look at there is the Areca income, which is in orange, and small businesses. So these, heiress households therefore have, they have income that they get from there, but they also have, the capacity, the social capital often to then move to, other small businesses and so on. The non-heiress households, on the other hand, the way they make up is with wage labor. With, you see that 12.7%, which is in, well, what color is that? Okay, so there you go. Yeah, that's the one. So here I mean, this is a finer version of the previous graph, which is showing that you have heiress households have more areca palm trees as well as cashew trees. You see that there's a significant difference, but you see that this is also reflected in the ownership of livestock. It is also seen in the ownership of wet rice fields, as well as wet rice. The consumption of wet rice. And part of the reason for this is that the heiress households were also the first adopters of plantation. And the reason that they were able to do that is because of the asymmetry that had already existed in the society. It was not. It's a myth to believe that Garo societies or perhaps many other societies in the Northeast are all egalitarian societies. That's really not the case. I think as scientists, I think we need to sort of dig deeper into that question. That's really not the case. So this is a clear example of that. So heiress households were the people who had enough capital early on to take the risks, to go get on to try out plantations, and that's the reason why they have the amount of plantations that they have today. But then does that mean that this is then leading to some sort of marginalization or something of that sort? There we see a very interesting picture. We don't see that we see that the differentiation that is created does not go on to create animosities of any kind. It's we see that there is a Garo moral economy at work. We see that the status that these households, the heiress households in particular, have also comes with obligations, and that's part of their society. That and these obligations are obligations of to make sure that other people in the matri locality are taken care of, and this is something that is very strong in these communities. These obligations, I think, then lead to a sort of a mitigation of a runaway differentiation and marginalization that we might otherwise expect. And therefore, there is no real, intimate exclusion of the type that I was, talking about earlier, where you have the, kin groups, where certain groups of, of the kin, exclude the others. That's not really taking place. It is noticed in places like Sulawesi in Indonesia. And so, in total, what we notice is that flexible land tenure, the reproduction of the social system, and the Garo moral economy together, they create a differential ownership, but they obviate marginalization. But importantly, it also legitimizes the differentiation that is created, which is partly the reason why, when I was, many instances where I was talking to people there, no one seemed to have a problem with the fact that someone had more land, or somebody had more, cattle, or there wasn't much of an issue about it. And this is a quote that I think is sort of summarizes it perfectly. Bethsaida's family is finding it hard to get by. Peter has to find wage labor to get income for the family. We decided to give them a cashew plantation for doing shifting cultivation. They can convert it to areca plantation the year after that. They need it since their daughters are now going to school. Anyway, my husband pays much of their expenses. The children's expenses. It would be good that they have areca plantation. What I want to show is that Nana there that I mentioned is the woman in yellow. The cousin her cousin is this, who is seated on the ground, and her daughter Betsaida is sitting there with with the child. So and this is a scene that you will see in almost every matri locality that you walk into. They're very closely knit, and these aspects of responsibilities and so on, play a role. But despite all this, we see that shifting cultivation is precariously placed today in the landscape. There is no significant signs of fallow management or anything that is seen in some parts of the country, as well as in other parts of the world. We see that productivity is generally limited, and that there seems like there is a overall trend of a single crop. They seem to be moving towards that direction, and so there is a chance that they could be they could be moving towards a more a situation of market vulnerability, which may then endangers this then endangers flexibility of their their tenurial system if everything gets privatized. And from the point of view of biodiversity conservation, when we look at this, this is not particularly conducive. This conversion of the landscape is not particularly conducive to biodiversity conservation. And with rising aspirations, such as with that come with education and with the exposure to markets, the economy has opened. So the question then is, are we going to see a case of outmigration where people will be moving out, there'll be remittances that come in, which then leads to a sort of a reproduction of the rural space? Is there something like that we will see, or are we going to see more of what we have already, which is the sort of what I call site fidelity of everyone is around in that region? No one has really stepped out, everybody is there. But if that is the case, then it's not a great sign. And so I finally move to my concluding chapter. Since this has been a summary of my my PhD, I'm not going to summarize it again. Theoretically and methodologically, I point out that there is a need for normative clarity when we when we do mapping. There is a need to focus on why we are mapping certain categories, why why they are important, and what they're important for. And it's very important to identify those reasons, without which there'll be, I think there'll be a lot of confusion in terms of identifying causes of certain certain aspects such as deforestation or intensification. I want to point out something else. This may seem a little banal, but it's not. I want to emphasize the aspect of ground truthing. This is it's something that has not been there very much. And this is part of the reason why there's so much confusion that exists in mapping today. But I think that I'm emphasizing that again. I've shown that you have multi-season mapping can be used for something like mapping a shifting cultivation landscape. But in doing so, you have to make sure that you avoid double counting. I also then point out that the abductive causal eventism as a framework is, as a research approach, is a relevant approach for unpacking causal histories. As I pointed out earlier, it's not one of these cases where it's completely atheoretical. It's not. You can use theory, and it can be incorporated with other more, say in this case, more ethnographically conducted work. It can be the two can be merged. You can form. You have multiple hypotheses that are taken in, and that's the way this works. You identify the event, but then you work with multiple hypotheses and work backwards. The advantage is that it helps you identify factors or explanations that may otherwise not be found in standard theories. So, for example, in my case, I've already showcased the importance of history. I've pointed out the importance of structural conditions such as that of autonomy of this region, which is it could be context specific, but it still is important, and contingent events in determining land use change. And also the aspect of the social construction of the event and the event categories that I've already spoken about in detail. The fact that I focus so much on population may be a little controversial, but I think it's important when we look at particularly hill environments and so on, that the role of population should not be ignored. I think it needs to be taken very seriously. But I think it needs to be seen in conjunction with several of the other factors that that may be operating with it, and so we may not see standard theoretical lines within which everything operates, but you may see very interesting trends anyhow. And what we see in Garo Hills, for example, is an example of what Harold Brookfield pointed out, that when you have explosion of when you have population increase, what they then did was not really they had intensified the practice, yes, but they also modulated their tenurial system to ensure that they increase productivity from the land. So more importantly, it's it's also important now to reimagine the shifting cultivator as as peasants, as cosmopolitan villagers, as socially urban farmers now, because we need newer ways to look at these people, and they're not we should not be looking at them, we should not be idealizing them as people who belong to some static, seen them in any static form. And from a policy perspective, I point out that shifting cultivation and plantations and plant are the dominant land use. This has an implication for both rural development as well as environmental conservation. I pointed out already that the feeling that the whole area is forested, particularly in Northeast, on the whole, it could be wrong. We could be wrong. So I think we need to sort of relook that whole question again. And there is a need for revised estimates of Northeast forest and agriculture. Given the better nutritive quality of shifting cultivation produce, I think it's important to ask the question. Well, productivity is low, yes, but then we need to seriously consider whether this could be a possible candidate for the supplementary nutrition program of the ICDS. It is, but for that to happen, I think there has to be serious, change in policy in terms of how we see this practice. I also point out, based on the study, I've also pointed out that the social welfare schemes such as the NREGS and PDS has played an important role, and that if plantation booms and so on are to happen, then that's going to restrict the risk aversion strategies that these farmers already possess, and that can bring them closer to poverty. With that, I come to the end of it, but I'd like to, I think I want to say that without these people, these are some people from the village of Asumpara, without whom this work would not have happened. Those two at the right-hand top corner were my field assistants, without whom this work would not have happened either. And the two people in the middle were my hosts, and these were, yes, and most importantly, these were all very important key informants. I want to also thank, Sharad, without whom I think, it would have been very difficult to, to do this interdisciplinary work without his help. But also Vasavi, from whom I've learned a lot, Arini and Nitin. I want to also, thank Professor B.K. Tiwari. I don't know if he's listening in, but he had introduced me to the region, to the Nehu library, and so on, which is very important. Daniel Linkti, Ranku, and the families of Jemima and Ophelia, to the Atri Academy in particular, and to Siddharth Milind and Madhvi, Mahe, and Eco-Informatics Lab people there, the Atri student community, all of you. Jagdish, who had played a role, initially we had sort of tried to put me in touch with people who were working in the Northeast. Thank you very much for that, Jagdish. And I want to also thank, Madhura, Venkat, Shivani, Radhika, Nirban, Roshni, Anuja, Soni, Rashmi, Ovi, and Ubashi in particular. Thank you very much. And thank you, Atri, Sharad, and the Dulip Matai Nature Conservation Trust for financial assistance. So Mithala means thank you. Mithala Aro Valna means thank you and good evening in Garo.
Well, thank you, Amit, and thank you all for staying with the presentation in spite of the technical glitches that we had in the beginning that also delayed the proceedings. The floor is now open for questions, both in person and in the chat box. And if people want to just in the chat box say that they want to or raise their hands and ask questions orally, that is also possible. I think we have 15-20 minutes for the Q&A session. So please go ahead. Jagdish.
Amit, really nice overview of a very dynamic socio-ecological system shifts over time and space. And so this just brings me to defining the current dynamics, right? So, I mean, all systems are dynamic, and there has always been some degree of change, even when we thought or would have imagined the shifting cultivation was some sort of a stable system, over a larger spatial shifts and so on. But the system that you're seeing now with cash crop and other state playing a role in certain and market forces, and so it lends itself to a particular type of description, and I'm just wondering whether what you would describe it, because it seems to be some elements from the past and combining with various other types of pressures on land. Do you think that it would lead to some sort of a new regime overall in terms of land use and socio-ecological systems, or do you think that the dynamism is going to be enhanced because of various factors?
Yeah, I think you're right in the sense that, I mean, firstly, I think what we are seeing is, an extremely composite picture of, several forces that are at play, and, many things that are operating there. I think it's what, depending on what I've, seen now in this particular village as well as in other parts of Garo Hills, I think it's very clear that there is a very felt need for, cash income. And that's something that is very strong. And I wouldn't be surprised if they, continue, to, convert land to plantations. It is happening actually. What could happen is if there is some, serious, crash in the market, or if there is, pest, some sort of, pestilence or something of that sort. There could be, changes in the way they do things. But then the crucial factor I think that comes into play there, I think, is this. One of the things that is happening there is that the current crop of people who are the slightly older generation who know the practice of shifting cultivation, how to do it, and the skills that are needed for it, and so on. So that's something that is slowly waning. With education and so on, it's what we are seeing is that trend is there is a de-skilling that is operational now. So you have the younger folk who don't know enough. So one of the things that I remember many farmers were telling me is this, that the young people would, their own sons and daughters, often when they come to work with them in the fields, they don't know which is the plant and which is the weed. So they end up, plucking the wrong things, and this sort of thing. So you have, so I think there is a serious case of knowledge in this kind of farming, diminishing, over a period of time. But I think, with a certain, there could be other, so that could be one turn that can take place. But then there are other factors too that, that could, help them, which is such as, the aspect of social capital, because they're networked in such, diverse fashions across, across matrilineal lines and so on. And it doesn't just stop with the village, the household, the matrilineal locality, or even the village. it moves into villages outside, it moves into, several, that broader region as a whole. So it's quite possible that even if they lack knowledge in certain things, they could get help in terms of, reviving their practice in a different form. If somebody doesn't have seed to sow, they could just go and get it from their cousin who is in the next village. It's very much possible. There is nothing stopping them from doing that, and they will happily do it too. Meaning they will do it and they will give it. Because there is this strong element of reciprocity that is inbuilt within their culture. So I think this is something that is very, I mean, we haven't investigated this, deep enough. And certainly from India, I think there's not been, this needs, a very, a hardline anthropologist, to be doing this work to understand some of these things in, great detail. So I think that's what we see. But it is possible that if you have very serious push from, say, the state, or extension activities and so on, for plantations, you could see things changing in a very different direction. That is very much possible. It's very much possible.
So we have a lot of questions now in the chat box. So I'm going to table some of those questions.
Hello.
Maybe to the room. Yeah.
Hello.
Avinash.
Hello, everyone.
Sorry, who's?
This is Dr. Avinash Parina. Yes, sir. So,
can you hold on for a second? There are already questions in the chat box. I need to take them up first. I will come back to you. Yeah.
okay, sure.
So Nitin Pandit has asked a question, which is a very interesting one. When you use ACE, how do you compare alternative potential causal explanations? So how do you how do you say which one actually works and which one doesn't when you have multiple possible explanations?
Yeah. Well, so in this case, for example, when I was looking at, let me give this example to sort of, to illustrate this. So I was pointing the aspect of, the Neo-Malthusian, trajectory, which is one, theoretical line of inquiry. The second is the aspect of the, Bose-Rupian, intensification, which is another theoretical inquiry. And the third one, which is the Brookfieldian line, which is whose I've already stated what it is. So so in this case, what happened is you see, one has to frame the hypothesis first. That number one, you could have a case where hypothesis one is this: that you have a population that increases, and that leads to say certain conditions of scarcity or something of that sort, and that limits the way changes, land use changes take place or something of that sort. The second could be that the expectation or the hypothesis there could be that you see the Bose-Rupian change actually taking place. You see intensification of different sorts. So for example, lots of areas which is of hilly landscapes being converted to, say, terraced farming or something of that sort. That's a clear sign of Bose-Rupian intensification. In this case, I didn't see that. That was not there. So the important thing is to be aware of what the theory states, and you need to also know what say perhaps a couple of examples of such what these theories and case studies of what these theories might show. So one example is what we see, say, in Konoma in Nagaland, where you see terrace farming. That's a classic example of Bose-Rupian intensification. But I'm not entirely sure how exactly it came into being. It's been around for quite a while, but the reason why it took place is, and the particular reasons why it took place is not entirely sure to me. In this particular instance, there was no Bose-Rupian intensification. You had a case where there was some flatland, some valley areas which got opened up, and that got intensified. And that was it. There was no further conversion of hill lands, or and these are undulating areas. So one reason could be that it's these are they're not steep enough for cultivation. The second reason could be that there wasn't enough these. So in order for Bose-Rupian intensification to take place, you need capital. you can't, go on and do, wet rice farming if you don't have adequate capital. You need, resources for it. You need people. You need labor, maybe technology. In this case, they didn't have all that. They didn't have all that. I've already stated that it's, they went through a case of, scarcity and so on. So they, they didn't have, many of them did not have that, that capital. So I think this is, so one needs to be very, very, sort of say nimble on the foot, on the foot when it comes to, looking at these theories and seeing what may be the one that is most, suited or not. I hope that answers the question. So.
The next question is, what is the percentage of farmers maintaining 2-year Jhum farms? How are they managing the first and second year plots plus arecanut plantations in terms of time and human resources? Also, what is the scale of fragmentation of community managed lands and its impact on access and benefit sharing?
Okay, several ties there. Okay, so the first. So in this particular village, the number of people who are doing a 2-year Jhum farming are none. I think, the mapping that I did was based on, the amount of work, the amount of field work that I did in that period. The, in all the villages that I had visited and spoken with, many of them during the time that I had done my mapping work, for the field work for the mapping, people had stated that it was a 2-year cultivation. And that's the reason why I went about with that. In this particular village, by the time I reached there, which was several years later, they had, brought it down to just a single year of cultivation because it was no more, it wasn't productive enough to do a 2-year cycle. So, sorry, a 2-year cultivation cycle. So, how are they managing the 2-year plots? Okay, so for those areas where they did that kind of practice, you had in the first year they would plant cereal crops. In the second year, cereal crops are completely removed. There's only vegetables and so on. A couple of that's how it is practiced. So in this particular case, what I noticed is that 2 of the 3 clans had mostly only fragmented lands. It was only one clan that had, a large, community organized sort of, shifting cultivation practice. Much of the others had, it was individual fields that they had sort of, put together, and that's how they were working. So.
Divya Gupta is asking a question about how was it to navigate in the field, especially while working with the tribal community? What were the key challenges and how were they addressed?
Well, one challenge, of course, is the aspect of language. It took me quite a while to sort of, get a sense of what, what people are saying. That's one. The other aspect is the question of acceptance. It's given a short period of time, there's the limit to which one can get, shall I say, immersed in the field. So that was certainly a challenge. So I couldn't undertake, say my household survey, for example, was kept way up to the to the back of my entire my field work because of this reason. My first of the 3 of the 6 months, 6.5 months. It's I had to spend about 2.5, maybe 3 months to just acquaint myself with the community. Just go meet people, spend time with them, spend time in their social activities, travel with them to other villages, and so on. So that was something that had to be done. So it was a necessary, aspect of field work. So that was the. I don't consider it a challenge, but it's the necessity of such work.
Did you also had a question about? Did you also had a question about the institutions in the region? Are they local or traditional institutions? If so, what has been their role in the land use change?
I don't know what, I don't know. How
I think,
they're
Divya, if
differentiating
I'm not mistaken, what you mean is traditional institutions versus more modern Gram Panchayat type of systems, which are the ones that are functioning there.
Oh, okay, okay. No, it's mostly traditional. So so that's those are the those are the main institutions that are operational. So yeah, I mean that is the end of the answer really. I mean in terms of people who representatives of the state, for example, who come to the village are also so few. I mean, no one actually ends up there or anything of that sort. It's mostly just the way in the old ways of functioning.
Maybe I go now to Dr. Avinash Parida, who had a question he wanted to ask orally. Avinash?
Yes, sir. Good evening to all of you. My question to Dr. Amit. First, congratulations to him. My question is to Amit. So, what is your suggestion for this Zoom practices? It should be continue or it should be stopped?
Well, it's not for me to answer that. It's it's not for me to answer that. It's look. I mean, if okay, let me try and answer it this way. I think it's okay. I'll try and sort of give I'll use certain other studies that have also come out from the Northeast. Recent studies that have come out from the Northeast. There's one in forest policy and economics that came out, which said that by Dilip Pandey and others that said that one of the reasons why shifting cultivation practice operates is because they have a cultural they have a cultural affinity to it. I would go with that. It's and that's also what I see. There is a they maintain it. It's I couldn't show that I couldn't show this one graph. It's quite interesting. This is when you look at this the trend of intensification in the region. It's in the last about 15 years. You will be surprised, but I think they've managed to stabilize the fallow period to about 4 to 5 years. They've not gone past that. They haven't sort of pulled it down all the way to zero. They haven't eliminated that practice or anything. They need it because they use it. They depend partly on the markets. They need this in case something doesn't work out, and this reality is something that they have faced for the longest period. That element of precarity is something that they have faced for the longest period. And it's not only shifting cultivators. If you see broader work on smallholders across the world, I mean, this is something that you will notice that they maintain 1 foot in subsistence, another foot in the market. This is standard practice. I mean, if anything, I think that should be the rule. We should know that. And I think any operation, that any policy, anything that one wants to state about people who engage in such activities, I think you should have this theoretical backing in mind. To when we are suggesting anything. That's all I think I have to say.
I'm going to toss the
Okay.
back to the room in case there are questions from the room. Avinash, I'm going to ask you to hold off. I think we are running out of time, so there are also a couple more questions in the chat box. And any questions in the room that need to be taken up? So I'll go back to the questions in the chat box. There are 2 more questions that are, one is from Amba Jamir. You observe that shifting cultivation had a higher return per hectare than plantations. How can this be capitalized upon, and what could be the interventions to sustainably enhance this factor?
Okay, let me start with this. I think one way to approach that question is to say that it's. I mean, thank you for asking that question. It's an important one. It's Dr. Ambajamir, I think you know this, that it's, you being a Naga, I think you know this, that it's, people in the urban areas enjoy the food that comes out of the shifting cultivation, fields. It's, this is something that, it's, I mean, so it's not something that is specific to just, the villagers who cultivate it. There is an active market and people prefer it. I mean, let me just, give you an anecdote from, my, my work. There was an officer in the soil and conservation department whose, primary responsibility as the official is to make sure shifting cultivation is stopped. But when I was, having an interview with him, he said, the food is absolutely fantastic. So it's, so it's, and he was pointing me to the right places to go, where to, where to find it and that sort of thing. So I think one way to capitalize on, I think this aspect is to tap into the, is to the cultural aspect of this. But I think if you still need a market, I think this is something, these farmers are not going to grow it, in extensive, landscapes, unless there's a market for it. I mean, I think currently it is lacking. It is extremely haphazard. So I think that needs to be organized very well. It's been going on. Attempts at that to that effect has been going on for some time, but I don't think it has, reached any fruition. So yeah.
I think we'll just take two more questions which are in the chat box. One is about oil palm and the other is about land use mapping. So Rishika Pardikar is asking, is oil palm uniquely problematic, whether in ecological terms or in terms of their economic incentives that reach the locals? So, and the second question is about land use mapping. Your views on building a bottom-up land use map. So oil palm, first question is about oil palm.
Right. So the oil palm, the question about that is, so the way it is being pushed in most places is based on an economic argument of the fact that it produces, a tremendous amount of oil per hectare as compared to, say, other, this seems to be the argument that is being pushed forward. But, I think, well, in India, I think there recently been some, news about all this. It's so I think if we are going to see monoculture farming, I think that's bad. I mean, in every possible way. I think maybe, well, if maybe certainly in the biodiversity sense, yes, and I think it will it will have a very strong effect on tenurial systems. It will have a strong effect in the way, as I pointed out earlier, their risk aversion strategies. All of that is going to get affected. Of course, it could also happen that it is promoted, but then it doesn't kick off. That can happen, because it needs, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think oil palm has to be, delivered to the processing unit very quickly or something like that. So it's, if there are such issues, it may stay, but it may just, vanish as well. So, that could also happen. In a short amount of time. Well, I think the primary thing in creating land use maps and so on is this aspect that I was pointing out, which is the element that we should be careful about making sure what sort of classes that we are choosing and why we are choosing those classes. Often, I mean, whether we are mapping shifting cultivation areas or not, and in other kinds of maps as well, often the standard practice in, say, from remote sensing agencies and so on, very often is to just use vegetation classification maps and stuff like that. But you have to ask the question, okay, why why is this of any concern? I mean, if the vegetation classification map, I mean, if it's for biodiversity, well, okay, fine. But if that's not going to say anything about agriculture, if you're doing a vegetation type based classification, but so for that, then you need a different kind of mapping. So you may need several, a land use map, but or several layers of maps. that that needs to be sort of built. So yeah, so that could be I think that's the approach to it.
Thank you, Amit. And I think given that we've almost gone for 2 hours now, we'll have to close this public presentation. But I would like to use my prerogative to make up for something that I missed out right in the beginning, which was to introduce Amit. So I'm not going to introduce him now because he's already given his presentation, but I'd like to say a couple of words about the work that he has put in. And I think the 3 things that come to my mind, one is, of course, which you have already seen, is interdisciplinarity. This is a person who did an MSc in ecology from Pondicherry, worked in Center for Ecological Sciences, but then decided very consciously that he wanted to bridge from the natural sciences into the social sciences, took courses at ISEC, took courses at NIAS, and a lot of other guidance from various social scientists and reading to enhance his abilities to actually do some serious social science work in this very complicated terrain, as you can see. So that's something you've already seen. But associated with that, 2 more characteristics, I think even that work, for example, many of us do the work in terrains that we are sort of familiar with. Whereas here is a person whose mother tongue is Malayalam and is had to learn Garo language, which is completely different, sort of linguistically speaking, completely different class of languages. He had to build that familiarity with a lot of hard work in order to work in that kind of a terrain. So that I thought was particularly commendable, but also courage and tenacity. This is a person who had very serious health problems, lost a couple of years or more of the PhD purely on the basis of health problems, and was at a stage where it wasn't clear that he could even go back to finish the fieldwork. But he decided after he had sort of reached some level of recovery that he would go back. He had some relapses in the field, but he still persisted with the fieldwork and finished that the very interesting village level case study that you all saw today, which was only because he had that kind of courage to confront his problems, overcome them, and the tenacity to hang in there and complete that kind of work that was required to answer some of the questions that were that he started with. He had to drop other things. For example, he would have loved to, I think, do more of the productivity implications or ecological sustainability implications that he had originally planned in mind, look at soil erosion under shifting cultivation or under plantation landscapes and so on. But I think these combination of attributes is what have made this dissertation and his presentation very special. I just wanted to highlight that and congratulate Amit myself in his work and wish him all the best for the future. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Arun.
Thanks all for joining us today, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. We'll take a 10-minute break and then come back into the closed door Viva portion of the presentation today.